Welcome to Lotus Lane Daily. I'm glad you're here. Today's wisdom is for anyone going through something hard. You know that feeling when another parent mentions, almost offhandedly, that their child has just started reading, and your child is the same age and shows zero interest in letters, and you smile and say, "That's wonderful," while something cold settles into your chest? You replay it later. You Google timelines. You lie awake at 2 a.m., wondering if you've missed something, if you've done something wrong, if the window is already closing on some crucial developmental phase that you didn't know to watch for. Comparing your child to other children is possibly the most universal thing parents do, and also the thing they feel most ashamed of doing. You know, intellectually, that every child is different. You've heard this 1,000 times. And yet, the moment you see a milestone you haven't hit, or hear about a skill your child doesn't have, the comparison happens anyway, fast and involuntary, and it pulls everything anxious in you to the surface. This isn't a character flaw, but it is worth understanding because the comparison habit, left unchecked, does real damage, not just to you, but to your child and to the relationship between you. Why parents compare and why it doesn't stop. The instinct to compare didn't come from nowhere. It comes in part from love. The fierce, anxious love that wants to make sure you're not missing something, that your child is okay, that you're doing your job. Milestones exist because they can flag when something needs attention, and paying attention to them is not inherently neurotic. It becomes a problem when the comparison stops being about genuine concern and becomes a persistent background hum of anxiety and measurement that never resolves into anything useful. Social media has made this dramatically worse. Every parent's feed is now full of curated images of other children, reading early, performing well, achieving things, without the full context of what those children struggle with, what wasn't photographed, what the family behind the highlight reel is actually navigating. You are comparing your complete knowledge of your child's difficulties against other people's most polished moments. It is an unfair contest, and there are no winners. The comparison habit also tends to be self-reinforcing. The more you compare, the more you see differences. The more you see differences, the more anxious you feel. The more anxious you feel, the more you look outward for reassurance, which produces more data for comparison, which produces more anxiety. Around and around it goes, and your child just gets older in the middle of it, wondering why you seem tense or like you're always measuring something. What the comparison is actually about. When you find yourself fixated on what another child can do that yours cannot, it's worth pausing and asking what's underneath. Often the comparison is less about the specific skill and more about a deeper fear. The fear that you have failed somehow. The fear that your child will suffer. The fear that the world will not be kind to them if they don't fit a certain template. The fear sometimes that your child reflects on you, that other parents are watching and calculating just as hard as you are. None of these fears are unreasonable. They come from caring, but they are worth separating from the comparison itself because addressing the fear directly is much more useful than trying to close whatever developmental gap you've decided matters this week. A line that has stayed with me. Comparison is the thief of joy. The moment you start comparing yourself to others, you lose sight of your own unique happiness. The same is true of your child. The moment you orient yourself primarily toward what your child is not as fast, not as verbal, not as social as someone else's child, you lose access to who they actually are. And who they actually are is the whole point. What you miss when you're comparing. Here is the concrete cost of the comparison habit. You stop seeing your child clearly. When your attention is organized around gaps, what they can't do yet, what others can do that they can't, you tend to stop noticing what's actually there. The specific way they approach a problem, the things they find funny, the skills that don't show up in any developmental checklist, but are unmistakably theirs. Children are perceptive in ways that adults underestimate. They pick up on the quality of your attention. They can feel the difference between being looked at and being measured. When a parent's gaze is primarily oriented toward what the child is not yet, the child learns to be ashamed of their present self, to experience their own reality as an insufficient version of something they should already be. That lesson lands quietly and stays for a long time. The child who is constantly compared, even silently, even with the best intentions, often grows up with a finely tuned radar for inadequacy. They become skilled at noticing what they lack before they notice what they have. You can trace that pattern in adult life back to something very specific, growing up in the gaze of someone who was always calculating. What helps instead? The goal isn't to stop caring about your child's development. It's to orient that care toward your child rather than toward an external standard. Compare your child to themselves over time, not to other children at a single point in time. Is your child learning? Are they growing? Have they moved since last month, last year, last season? A child who was terrified of the playground at 4 and now goes willingly at 5 has made enormous progress. Progress that is invisible when you're looking sideways at the child next door, who was never afraid of the playground to begin with. Your child's own arc is the relevant data. When you notice a genuine concern, act on it rather than stewing in it. Most of what you're comparing is anxiety wearing the costume of concern. But when something genuinely worries you, she still isn't speaking in sentences, he shows no interest in connecting with other children, talk to your pediatrician. Take action. The antidote to real concern is action, not more comparison. Consciously look for what your child is good at, in the same way you unconsciously look for what they're not. Not just the things they're supposed to be good at, the official milestones, but the specific qualities that are distinctly theirs. The kindness they show to animals, the patience they have with younger children, the way they figure things out by going around problems rather than through them. These qualities are real. They matter. They just don't show up in any chart. Be careful about what you consume. If the parent at the school gate reliably sends you into a spiral, it's fine to limit the depth of that conversation. If social media makes you feel like everyone else's child is racing ahead while yours is standing still, you are allowed to step back. Curating your inputs is not avoidance. It's a reasonable response to the reality that some information is making you a worse parent rather than a better one. An old piece of writing put this plainly. Each of you possesses a unique mission that no one else can fulfill. The question is whether you will discover it and dedicate your life to it. That's true of children too, and they can only discover it if the adults around them are looking for it rather than looking past it at some standardized version of who they were supposed to be. The longer work. Letting go of the comparison habit is not a one-time decision. It's a practice, something you have to catch yourself doing and gently redirect again and again. But it's worth doing. Not because it makes parenting easier, it doesn't particularly, but because it makes you available to the actual child in front of you rather than the statistical child you're benchmarking them against. And that availability, the feeling of being truly seen by someone who loves you, is one of the most important things you can give. Your child does not need to be like anyone else's child. They need someone who knows them, specifically, who has paid enough attention to understand what makes them themselves. That is a job only you can do, and it is made much harder when your attention is always drifting sideways to whoever you've decided is the standard this week. Come back to your child, the one right in front of you, as they actually are. That is the whole work, and it is enough. That's the wisdom for today. If something here landed for you, share it with one person who might need to hear it too. Take it slow. I'll see you tomorrow on Lotus Lane Daily.